What if the history we've been taught is only a fraction of the real story? What if beneath the familiar timeline of human progress, cavemen to kingdoms, kingdoms to empires, and empires to our modern world, there lies another history, one deliberately forgotten, erased by time, or buried under waves of catastrophe? Around the world, ancient myths speak with eerie consistency. They tell of golden ages when humanity lived in harmony with knowledge beyond comprehension. They speak of cataclysms, floods that drowned entire lands, fire that rained from the skies, and civilizations erased in a single night. And they whisper of survivors, scattered remnants who carried fragments of wisdom forward, encoding their memories into myths, monuments and symbols, so that future generations might one day uncover the truth. The strange part is this: those myths are not isolated stories from disconnected cultures. They echo each other across oceans and continents. The Sumerians, the Mayans, the Hindus, the Greeks, the Hopi, all separated by time and distance, yet all telling stories of destruction, rebirth, and forgotten greatness. How could that be? Was it mere coincidence, or could they be fragments of a shared memory? The last whispers of civilizations lost long before our textbooks begin. Archaeological discoveries like Göbekli Tepe, submerged cities off the coasts of India and Japan, and megalithic structures that defy explanation suggest that the myths may not be mere imagination. They may be echoes of a reality erased from human memory, leaving behind puzzles that modern science is still unable to fully explain. The truth is both fascinating and unsettling. Our own age of skyscrapers, satellites, and digital networks feels permanent, but so did the great cities of the past before they fell. If history is not a straight line but a cycle, then we may be standing at the crest of another turning point, blind to what comes next. Myths may not only be stories of the past, but warnings for the future. And if those warnings are real, then the most important question is not about what was lost, but whether we are doomed to repeat it. Every civilization has a story about where we came from, and the most curious part is not how different those stories are, but how similar they sound. Across deserts, jungles, and islands, cultures separated by oceans somehow describe beginnings that feel eerily alike: chaos transformed into order, gods descending to teach humanity, and cycles of destruction and rebirth. These are not random fairy tales scattered across the globe. They read like chapters of a larger book, one where different cultures preserved fragments of an older memory, a memory stretching far beyond the neat timelines we see in textbooks. Mainstream history insists that human civilization began around 6,000 years ago with the rise of Sumer and Egypt. But what if that's just the part of the story we still remember? What if entire earlier chapters have been erased, leaving behind only whispers carried through myth? Consider the strange consistency of creation myths. In Sumerian records, the world begins in chaos until the gods, known as the Anunnaki, bring order and knowledge. In Greek mythology, there is the Age of Kronos, when humanity lived in abundance under the care of powerful beings, only for that golden age to collapse. In Hindu cosmology, the Satya Yuga represents a time of truth and purity, followed by darker ages where wisdom slowly fades. The Maya spoke of multiple suns, ages of humanity that rose and fell before the present one. Even the Hopi people of North America speak of living through different worlds, each destroyed by fire, flood, or ice, before being reborn into the next. These stories emerge from lands that had no contact with each other, yet they all share the same structure: an age of greatness, a cataclysm, and the rebirth of humanity. If myths were just metaphors, the similarities would be easier to dismiss, but the more one studies them, the harder it becomes to ignore their striking parallels. Why would civilizations separated by continents all insist that history is cyclical, not linear? Why would they all preserve memories of destruction by fire and flood? And why would they describe golden ages so advanced that they almost sound like science fiction? It is as though humanity itself carries a deep memory of having lived through cycles before, memory preserved not in books or data, but in story, the one medium that could survive across millennia. But the mysteries do not end with myths. Archaeology continues to unearth discoveries that challenge our carefully constructed timelines. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, for example, is a massive stone complex dated to nearly 12,000 years ago, far older than any known civilization. Its intricately carved pillars show that whoever built it possessed advanced knowledge of architecture and symbolism, long before the so-called dawn of civilization. Even stranger, the site was deliberately buried, as if to preserve it for the future or to hide it from destruction. Off the coast of India, beneath the waters near Dwarka, lie ruins of cities that predate known urban centres. Off the coast of Japan, the Yonaguni monument reveals submerged stone terraces and steps that appear man-made. If these sites are genuine remnants of ancient cities, then they tell us one thing: human civilization has risen before, perhaps multiple times, only to be swept away by catastrophe and forgotten. Mainstream historians resist these conclusions, insisting that coincidences, erosion, or isolated development explain the anomalies. Yet the weight of global evidence paints another picture. Megalithic sites scattered across the world, from the pyramids of Egypt to the giant stone heads of Easter Island, from Stonehenge to Pumapunku in Bolivia, all display engineering mysteries that suggest a shared or lost knowledge. Some align perfectly with celestial events, as if their builders were tracking the skies with a precision that should have been impossible. Were these monuments the products of primitive cultures experimenting with stone, or the legacies of an earlier age of knowledge, one that collapsed and was buried under the weight of time? To understand why these stories matter, we need to look at how memory works. A civilization that collapses suddenly through flood, fire, or impact cannot carry forward its knowledge in libraries or machines. Those things are too fragile. What survives are stories encoded in myths, symbols, and rituals passed down by survivors who could not preserve technology but could preserve memory. Over thousands of years, details distort, metaphors replace specifics, and gods take the place of ancestors, but the essence of the story remains. That's why flood myths appear across continents. That's why stories of fire from the sky echo in Norse, Hindu, and Native American traditions. They are not inventions, they are memories, imperfect but enduring. And perhaps the strangest part of all is how these stories still speak to us today. We are taught to see ourselves as the pinnacle of human progress. But when you listen to the echoes of the past, you begin to wonder, are we truly the first to reach this height? Or are we simply the latest? If entire civilizations once thrived before us with knowledge we barely understand, then history is not the story of a steady climb from caves to skyscrapers. It is the story of cycles of humanity rising, reaching, falling, and forgetting. If we accept this, then the myths are no longer quaint stories. They are warnings. They tell us that what rises will fall, that golden ages end, and that cataclysm is not a question of if, but when. They tell us that we are not immune, that our skyscrapers and satellites are just as fragile as the stone temples of the past, and that one day they too may crumble, leaving behind fragments for future generations to puzzle over. The strange beginnings of our story are not beginnings at all. They are continuations, parts of a cycle far older than we imagine. And if we are in the middle of that cycle now, then the question is not whether myths are true, but whether we are willing to listen before it is too late. Of all the myths that echo through human history, none are more universal, more haunting, and more mysterious than the great flood stories. Nearly every culture, no matter how distant or isolated, carries some version of this tale, an overwhelming deluge that swept across the earth, drowning entire civilizations, sparing only a handful of survivors who would go on to rebuild the world. In Mesopotamia, we find the story of Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the man chosen by the gods to build a great boat and preserve life from the rising waters. In the Bible, the account of Noah mirrors that story almost exactly, an ark built to carry animals and humans through a divine catastrophe. Across the oceans, in India, the legend of Manu tells of a man warned by a great fish to build a vessel, saving the seeds of life when floods destroyed the earth. In the traditions of the Aztecs and Maya, we hear of previous suns, ages of humanity, one of which ended in floods that wiped the earth clean. Even the Hopi of North America speak of a time when water swallowed the land, forcing their ancestors to seek refuge in caves until the waters receded. These are not isolated myths, invented independently for entertainment. They are strikingly similar, almost identical in structure: a great flood, a chosen survivor, the preservation of life, and the rebirth of humanity afterward. If only one culture told this story, we might dismiss it as symbolic or allegorical. But when cultures separated by thousands of miles and oceans tell the same tale, the possibility emerges that they were all remembering something real, something so catastrophic that its memory had to be preserved across generations. Something so devastating that it shaped the very foundation of human mythology. Geology provides a chilling backdrop to these myths. At the end of the last ice age, around 12,000 years ago, the Earth experienced a dramatic rise in sea levels. As the great ice sheets covering North America and Eurasia melted, oceans surged upward by hundreds of feet, swallowing coastlines and lowlands. Entire landmasses disappeared beneath the waves. Places where millions of humans may have once lived are now submerged, erased from history except for the stories their descendants carried forward. Scientists call these events meltwater pulses, but ancient people would have experienced them as nothing less than the end of the world. Cities, villages, and fertile plains would have been drowned within a generation, leaving survivors traumatized and determined to never forget what had happened. What is even more striking is that archaeology has begun to uncover traces of these drowned worlds. Off the coast of India, near the city of Dwarka, divers have found submerged structures that appear to be ancient temples and streets, far older than the known cities of the region. Off Japan's Yonaguni Island lies a massive stone formation that some argue is a sunken city, with terraces, steps and pillars carved by human hands. In the Caribbean, sonar has detected strange geometric patterns on the seafloor, suggesting ruins of ancient settlements now buried beneath the ocean. Could these be remnants of the civilizations erased by the floods, the very ones preserved only in myth? If so, then the stories of Manu, Noah, and Utnapishtim are not allegories. They are survivor accounts of real events. The flood myths often describe more than just rising water. They speak of storms that raged endlessly, of skies darkened, of thunder and lightning accompanying the catastrophe. Some versions even describe fire and water together, as though multiple cataclysms struck at once. This has led researchers to consider whether the great floods were not merely caused by melting ice, but by sudden disasters like asteroid impacts or volcanic eruptions that rapidly destabilize the environment. The Younger Dryas event, a mysterious cooling period around 12,800 years ago, is one candidate. Some scientists propose that fragments of a comet struck the Earth, igniting massive wildfires, destabilizing ice sheets, and triggering sudden floods that devastated early human culture. To those who survived, it would have felt like divine judgment, the heavens themselves turning against humanity. The fact that the flood myths also emphasize survival is deeply telling. In nearly every version, humanity does not vanish completely. A small group endures, chosen or lucky, and carries forward the seeds of life. In the biblical story, Noah preserves animals 2 by 2. In the Hindu version, Manu carries the seeds of plants in the knowledge of rituals. In some Native American traditions, the survivors climb mountains or retreat into caves, carrying with them the knowledge of how to begin again. These details suggest not just myth, but cultural memory. People remembering how their ancestors survived and encoding those survival strategies into story so future generations could endure when catastrophe struck again. If we follow this logic, the great flood myths become more than religious tales. They become history disguised as legend, warnings preserved in story form. They tell us that the world has ended before, that civilizations have been erased, and that survival depends not on denying the catastrophe, but on preparing for it. They tell us that cycles of destruction are not just mythological, they are real, and they return again and again. What makes this even more unnerving is how fragile our modern civilization is in the face of the same forces. Rising sea levels are already threatening coastal cities, storms grow stronger, floods more devastating. As the climate shifts, entire regions face the possibility of being submerged in the coming centuries, echoing the same events described in ancient stories. If the great floods of the past could erase entire civilizations, what would another deluge do to our own world of interconnected cities, fragile supply chains, and billions living on coastlines? The myths may not just be memories of the past, they may be glimpses into our own future. The flood stories, then, are not simply symbolic. They are the oldest record of trauma humanity has carried, trauma that reshaped the earth and erased whole cultures. They remind us that history is not as stable as we like to imagine, that what seems eternal, the cities, the monuments, the systems we rely on, can vanish in a single generation, swallowed by forces beyond our control. The survivors of those ancient floods wanted us to remember, to never forget, that what rises can fall, and that water is both the giver and taker of life. Their stories are not quaint myths, they are warnings whispered across 10,000 years, urging us to prepare, urging us not to forget. But just as the flood myths warn of destruction, they also hint at resilience. Humanity endures. Even when cities are drowned and lands erased, survivors rise from the waters and begin again. Perhaps that is the deeper lesson hidden in these myths. Not just that catastrophe is inevitable, but that survival is possible, that rebirth follows destruction, and that even in the darkest flood, the seeds of a new world are preserved. It is both terrifying and comforting to realize that our ancestors faced what seemed like the end of everything. And yet here we are, their descendants, still telling their stories, still searching for the truths buried beneath the waves. If flood myths represent humanity's memory of overwhelming water, then the stories of fire from the sky are their fiery counterpart. Memories of destruction so sudden and terrifying that survivors could only describe it as divine wrath. Across the world, civilizations separated by oceans tell eerily similar tales of the heavens igniting, of fire raining down, and of entire worlds consumed in flame. To the ancient Norse, it was Ragnarok, when the heavens would crack open, the sky would blaze, and fire giants would march across the earth. The Hopi of North America spoke of a previous world destroyed by fire, leaving only a handful of survivors to enter the next. The Aztecs believed that one of the earlier suns was consumed in fire, erasing humanity until it could be reborn. In Hindu cosmology, cycles of time are marked by both floods and fire, with weapons of the gods capable of burning entire cities to ash. The Greeks too preserved the myth of Phaethon, the reckless son of Helios, who lost control of the sun chariot, scorching the earth before being struck down by Zeus. What makes these myths compelling is not just their recurrence, but the detail with which they describe cataclysm, flames that blot out the sky, ash that covers the land, thunder that shakes the earth. Survivors wandering through wastelands of burned forests and blackened soil. These are not the vague metaphors of Marathi tales. They are vivid, visceral accounts, the kind that could only be born from lived trauma. And when we turn to science, we find events that fit disturbingly well with these memories. Around 12,800 years ago, the Earth entered what scientists call the Younger Dryas, a sudden cooling period marked by wildfires, climatic chaos, and the extinction of countless species. One of the leading theories is that a comet or fragments of a larger object struck the Earth, igniting massive fires that scorched entire continents, sending shockwaves of dust into the atmosphere and plunging the planet into chaos. The evidence is sobering. Layers of Earth from this period contain what geologists call the black mat, a band of soil rich in soot and carbon, evidence of continent-spanning wildfires. Beneath this layer, mammoths, giant sloths, and other Ice Age creatures vanish from the fossil record. Above it, they are gone. The planet burned, and then the survivors faced centuries of cold and scarcity. To the people who lived through it, fire would not have been an abstract natural disaster. It would have been an apocalypse. And as with the floods, the survivors would have carried their memories forward, encoding them in myth so future generations would never forget the day the sky rained fire. Other possible events may have also left their mark. Volcanic eruptions, like the explosion of Mount Toba around 74,000 years ago, could have blanketed skies with ash and fire, wiping out much of humanity and leaving survivors clinging to life in a dimmed, poisoned world. The eruption of Santorini around 1600 BCE devastated the Minoan civilization and may be remembered in myths of divine anger. Even smaller eruptions like Krakatoa in the 19th century created sunsets of blazing red across the world. To ancient people, such events would have been interpreted not as geology but as gods punishing humanity. Perhaps the most intriguing aspect of the fire myths is their connection to weapons of unimaginable power. In the Hindu epics, descriptions of celestial weapons sound uncannily like modern nuclear blasts. Arrows that shine brighter than 1,000 suns, explosions that scorch entire cities, fallout that poisons the land and leaves survivors with hair and nails falling out. Skeptics dismiss these as poetic exaggerations, but when combined with global myths of fire from the heavens, the question becomes harder to ignore. Were these truly symbolic stories, or were they distorted memories of real destruction, preserved in language that later generations could understand? Even more unsettling is the possibility that these stories are not only about the past, but warnings about the future. Humanity today faces the same vulnerability to fire from the sky. Comets and asteroids still streak across our solar system, and though we like to believe we can track them all, many smaller ones slip by undetected. A single impact, even smaller than the one that ended the dinosaurs, could devastate cities, ignite forests, and collapse the fragile systems of our global civilization. Fire from above is not just a mythological memory, it is a threat that hangs over us every day, whether we choose to acknowledge it or not. There is also the psychological element of these myths. Fire is both creation and destruction. It warms, it cooks, it illuminates, but it also consumes, destroys, and erases. In myth, fire often represents divine judgment, the cleansing force that ends an age and allows a new one to begin. The flood wipes clean with water, but the fire burns everything down to ash. In this sense, fire myths serve as a reminder not only of catastrophe but of renewal. The idea that humanity must be tested by destruction before it can rise again. It is a cycle that echoes in nearly every tradition: an age of abundance, a fall into corruption, a judgment by fire, and then rebirth. What ties all of this together is the universality of the memory. From the icy north to the tropical jungles, from deserts to islands, people who never met, who never traded, and who never shared language, somehow remembered the same trauma. They remembered the sky blazing, the land burning, the air choking with smoke. They remembered fire that came not from hearths or torches, but from above, uncontrollable and all-consuming. And they remembered the terror of survival, the fragile thread of humanity stretched thin, and the need to never forget. That is why the myths survive, not because they are symbolic tales, but because they are survival stories, carried forward like a scar etched into human memory. If the great floods remind us of the fragility of land and the power of water, then the fire myths remind us of the vulnerability of the sky itself. They tell us that the heavens are not always a source of light and life. They can also turn against us in an instant. They tell us that humanity has lived through burning skies before, and that it may live through them again. And perhaps most importantly, they tell us that we are not as permanent as we believe. Civilizations can rise, build, and thrive, but all it takes is one night of fire raining from above to erase centuries of progress. The myths of fire from the sky, then, are not just legends. They are fragments of memory, distorted but not destroyed, preserved to remind us of what came before and what could come again. They whisper that the cycle of destruction is not finished, that we are still part of the same fragile story, and that unless we listen, unless we prepare, we may one day find ourselves looking up at a sky filled with fire, realizing too late that the ancients had been warning us all along. If myths of floods and fire are memories of catastrophe, and stories of golden ages are memories of something else entirely, an age of prosperity, abundance, and harmony, so extraordinary that later generations could only describe it in terms of paradise. Nearly every culture has its own version of such a time, a period when humanity lived without struggle, when knowledge flowed freely, and when the world itself seemed more alive, more vibrant, more connected to the divine. The Greeks told of the age of Kronos, when humans lived in peace, needing no laws, no toil, no weapons, because the earth provided freely and the gods walked among mortals. Hesiod described it as a time when men were like gods, free from pain and labor, only to be followed by successive declines, the Silver, Bronze, and Iron Ages, each more corrupt and more violent than the last. In Hindu cosmology, this cycle is preserved in the doctrine of the Yugas. The Satya Yuga, or Age of Truth, is the first and most perfect era when righteousness prevails and humanity lives close to the divine. It is followed by the Treta Yuga and the Dvapara Yuga, where virtue begins to wane, wisdom diminishes, and corruption spreads. Finally, we enter the Kali Yuga, the age of darkness and decline, marked by greed, deception, and suffering. According to this worldview, history is not a straight line of progress, but a wheel turning endlessly, repeating cycles of greatness and decay. In Mesoamerican traditions, the Maya and Aztecs also believed the world had passed through previous suns, or ages, some destroyed by water, some by fire, each a golden age in its own way, until the cycle turned once more. Even the Hopi tell of previous worlds, each ending in disaster, each beginning again, as if humanity were destined to rise, fall, and repeat. The persistence of these Golden Age myths raises unsettling questions. Were they merely allegories, idealized dreams of simpler times? Or do they point to something real, memories of civilizations so advanced, so prosperous, that their existence now feels impossible to imagine? Some evidence suggests that Golden Ages may not be pure fantasy. Archaeological sites like Göbekli Tepe built more than 11,000 years ago, display an astonishing sophistication for their time. The intricate carvings, the precise astronomical alignments, and the monumental scale suggest a culture with advanced knowledge, organization, and artistic vision. Yet Göbekli Tepe was deliberately buried, as if to protect or conceal it, only to be rediscovered thousands of years later. What kind of society built it, and why did it vanish so completely? Could it have been a fragment of a lost golden age, a civilization erased by catastrophe, remembered only through myth? The legends of Atlantis, preserved by Plato, provide another tantalizing glimpse. Described as a powerful island civilization that mastered architecture, agriculture, and navigation, Atlantis was said to have fallen due to corruption and pride, destroyed by floods and earthquakes in a single day and night. Scholars argue over whether Plato invented the story as allegory, but its parallels to flood myths, to submerged ruins, and to other Golden Age tales suggest otherwise. Could Atlantis or something like it have been real, a memory of a civilization that flourished before the rise of known history? And if so, how many other Atlantean cultures might have existed, erased so thoroughly that only whispers remain? Golden Age myths often describe not just prosperity but extraordinary knowledge. In the Indian epics, gods and heroes wielded weapons of immense power, rode flying machines called vimanas, and commanded knowledge of astronomy and science far ahead of their time. In Mesoamerican traditions, deities like Quetzalcoatl and Viracocha were said to have taught agriculture, astronomy, and laws to the people before mysteriously departing. In Sumerian records, the Anunnaki descended from the heavens to establish order, bringing writing, kingship, and knowledge of the stars. Were these beings literal gods, or survivors from a previous civilization who carried fragments of advanced knowledge into a darker age? If so, then the Golden Ages may have been real, and the myths are distorted memories of encounters with those who remembered. The Golden Age myths also raise a deeper question. Why do we assume that progress is linear? Our modern worldview insists that humanity has moved steadily upward, from primitive caves to digital skyscrapers. But the myths suggest otherwise. They suggest that humanity rises to greatness, falls into ruin, and rises again, each time forgetting the past, each time believing it is the first. Archaeological anomalies reinforce this unsettling idea. Sites like Pumapunku in Bolivia feature stones so precisely cut and so massive that even modern technology would struggle to replicate them. Ancient maps, such as the Piri Reis map of the 16th century, appear to show Antarctica's coastline free of ice, knowledge supposedly impossible at the time. These anomalies hint at lost knowledge, fragments of golden ages erased by catastrophe, preserved only in legend. Even modern science, in its own way, confirms the fragility of civilizations. Complex societies depend on fragile systems, food, trade, energy, that collapse quickly when disrupted. If an advanced society existed 10,000 years ago, a sudden flood, comet strike, or volcanic eruption could have erased it almost overnight. Survivors would have lost not just cities but the infrastructure to sustain knowledge. Writing would be forgotten, technologies abandoned, and within a few generations the memory of greatness would become story. To those survivors, their ancestors would have seemed like gods, their ruins mysterious, their knowledge divine, and so they told their children of a golden age, of a time when humanity lived closer to the gods, when the earth gave freely, when wisdom was abundant. Over centuries, those stories hardened into myth, but the core memory remained. We were great once, and we may be again. Golden Ages, then, are not just fantasies of paradise. They are fragments of cultural memory, distorted but enduring, preserved across continents because they matter. They remind us that what we see as permanent is fleeting, that civilizations rise to dazzling heights only to collapse, leaving survivors to dream of what once was. They remind us that human history is not a ladder climbing ever higher, but a wheel turning endlessly, repeating the same cycles of creation, destruction, and renewal. Perhaps the most unsettling thought is this: what if we are living in a golden age right now, one destined to collapse just as all the others did? Our skyscrapers, satellites, and digital networks feel permanent, but so did the palaces of Rome, the temples of Angkor, the pyramids of the Maya. Each thought they had reached the pinnacle, each believed their greatness would last forever, and each left behind ruins and myths. If history is cyclical, then our golden age too will end, swept away by forces we cannot control, leaving only fragments for future generations to puzzle over. And they will tell stories of us, of an age of light, of machines that spoke, of gods who commanded the sky. They will call it a golden age, never realizing it was just another turn of the wheel. In the end, the Golden Age myths are both inspiring and tragic. They inspire us by reminding us of humanity's potential, of the heights we can reach when knowledge, wisdom, and abundance align. But they also warn us of impermanence, of the fragility of greatness, of the inevitability of decline. They whisper across millennia that paradise is fleeting, that cycles cannot be escaped, and that what we call progress is only the crest of a wave destined to crash. The question is not whether golden ages existed, but whether we will remember when ours ends, or whether we too will be reduced to myth. If the myths of floods, fire, and golden ages are the whispers of memory, then the ruins scattered across the world are the silent proof that something extraordinary existed before us. They rise from jungles, deserts, mountains, and even the ocean floor, defying explanation, mocking the timelines we've been taught, and hinting that entire chapters of human history have been erased. These forbidden ruins and lost cities are not merely relics of the past. They are puzzles, monuments that seem to speak in stone, as though their builders intended for them to survive long after everything else had been forgotten. They force us to ask questions that mainstream history cannot comfortably answer. Who built them, when, and why do they seem so far beyond the capabilities of the people we are told created them? Take Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, a site so strange and so ancient that its discovery shocked the archaeological world, dated to nearly 12,000 years ago. Long before agriculture or cities were supposed to exist, it consists of massive T-shaped pillars, some weighing up to 20 tons, intricately carved with animals and abstract symbols. According to conventional history, humans at that time were nomadic hunter-gatherers without the organization, tools, or knowledge to build such a place. Yet Göbekli Tepe proves otherwise. To make it even more mysterious, the site was deliberately buried by its builders, as if to protect it from something or to preserve it for the future. Why would people capable of such architectural genius erase their own work? Who were they, and where did their knowledge come from? If this was not the product of an advanced culture, then it forces us to reconsider everything we think we know about the dawn of civilization. Far from Turkey, on the coast of Japan lies another anomaly, the Yonaguni Monument. Submerged beneath the waves, this massive structure appears to have terraces, steps, and walls carved into geometric precision. Some argue it is a natural formation, shaped by currents and erosion, but others insist the scale and detail are unmistakably human. If it is a man-made structure, then it may date back to the last ice age, when sea levels were hundreds of feet lower and the area was dry land. That would place Yonaguni among the oldest ruins on Earth, the remnant of a drowned civilization erased by rising seas. Whether natural or not, its discovery raises an unsettling possibility. How many other ruins lie hidden beneath the ocean, beyond the reach of our exploration, holding secrets we are not yet ready to uncover? And then there is Pumapunku in Bolivia, a site so baffling that it has been called the Rosetta Stone of forbidden archaeology. Here lie massive stone blocks, some weighing more than 100 tons, cut with a precision so sharp that even modern machines would struggle to replicate it. The stones are fitted together with such perfection that no mortar was needed, and their angles are cut to near mathematical exactness. How did the builders achieve this at a time when, according to history, they had no advanced tools, no wheels, and no written language? Mainstream explanations insist it was done with simple stone hammers and brute force, but anyone who gazes upon the intricate interlocking blocks cannot help but feel that this was something more. Pumapunku looks less like the work of primitive builders and more like the remains of a culture with engineering knowledge we have lost. Other sites deepen the mystery. The Great Pyramid of Giza aligns with astonishing precision to the cardinal directions and to celestial bodies, suggesting an advanced understanding of astronomy. Its construction remains debated, with theories ranging from ramps to lost technologies, yet no explanation fully satisfies the scale of the achievement. Easter Island, with its enigmatic Moai statues, raises similar questions. How were these massive figures carved, moved, and erected by people with such limited resources? Machu Picchu in Peru, perched atop a mountain ridge, shows architectural genius in how its stones resist earthquakes, fitting together like a jigsaw puzzle without mortar. In each of these places, the same unsettling pattern emerges: structures that should not exist according to the conventional timeline, built with methods we cannot easily explain, hinting at a level of knowledge out of place in the ancient world. Perhaps most tantalizing of all are the submerged ruins now being discovered across the globe. Off the coast of India near Dwarka, archaeologists have found evidence of a lost city beneath the waves, complete with streets, walls and artifacts that suggest human habitation long before the supposed rise of Indian civilization. In the Caribbean, sonar has revealed geometric shapes on the seafloor that resemble roads and plazas, possibly the remnants of ancient cities drowned by rising seas. In the Mediterranean, off the coast of Greece, lies Pavlopetri, a city over 5,000 years old, now lying underwater but once a bustling port. Each discovery pushes the timeline of civilization further back, each suggesting that what we think of as the beginning may only be the latest rebirth after countless forgotten ages. The most unsettling question is why these ruins exist at all. If humanity was supposed to be primitive at the time these sites were built, then either our ancestors possessed knowledge we have underestimated, or we are looking at the remnants of a lost civilization, one erased so thoroughly that only fragments remain. Were these cultures victims of the floods and fires preserved in myth? Were they Golden Age societies wiped out by catastrophe, leaving behind monuments as the only testimony of their existence? Or did survivors scatter across the world, carrying fragments of knowledge to rebuild in places like Egypt, Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley, sparking the civilizations we call the first, when in fact they were only the latest? The forbidden ruins are not just archaeological curiosities, they are cracks in the official story, places where the neat narrative of human history falls apart. They force us to confront the possibility that we are not the first advanced culture to walk this earth, but one of many, part of a cycle of rise, fall and forgetting. They force us to question what else lies buried, not only beneath the soil and the sea, but beneath the myths we dismiss as fantasy. They remind us that what we call primitive may in fact be the distorted memory of something far greater, something that slipped through the cracks of time. What makes these ruins even more haunting is how much we have yet to discover. More than 70% of the Earth is covered by ocean, much of it unexplored. How many Yonaguni monuments, how many Dwarkas, how many Atlantean cities lie hidden beneath the waves, waiting to be found? Even on land, dense jungles hide ruins that satellites are only now beginning to detect. In South America, LIDAR technology has revealed vast ancient networks of cities and roads beneath the Amazon, proving that what we once thought of as untouched wilderness was once home to thriving civilization. What we know may only be a sliver of what truly exists, and the full scope of human history may still be buried, waiting for us to listen. In the end, the forbidden ruins and lost cities are not just relics of the past. They are messages carved in stone, reminders that civilizations rise and fall, that knowledge is gained and lost, and that our story is far older than we dare to admit. They stand as silent witnesses, daring us to ask uncomfortable questions, daring us to challenge the neat timelines and tidy explanations, daring us to remember that we too may one day leave behind only ruins, puzzling the survivors of the next cycle. They are proof that history is not a straight line, but a broken circle, and that what was once forgotten may one day be remembered again. If the ruins scattered across the world are the stones that speak silently, then myths are the voices that have whispered through generations, carrying fragments of truths too extraordinary to be dismissed. At first glance, myths seem like simple stories, fables told to entertain, to warn, to explain the unexplainable. But when we look closely, when we compare the myths of distant cultures separated by oceans and centuries, an uncanny pattern emerges. They speak of the same things: skies set aflame, floods drowning entire lands, beings descending from above, great teachers imparting knowledge, and cycles of destruction followed by rebirth. Could it be that myths are not mere inventions but coded histories, carefully disguised to survive the erosion of time? Could it be that within their metaphors lie fragments of knowledge from civilizations long lost? Take, for instance, the story of the Great Flood. The version most people know comes from the Bible, with Noah and his ark. Yet long before the Bible, the Sumerians told of Utnapishtim, chosen by the gods to survive a deluge that wiped out humanity. The Babylonians had Atrahasis, who built a vessel to save life from rising waters. The Greeks spoke of Deucalion and Pyrrha, who repopulated the earth after Zeus sent a flood to cleanse it. Even in faraway cultures, such as the Native American Hopi or the ancient Chinese, floods appear as the pivotal destruction event, erasing entire ages of mankind. If these were merely symbolic tales, why do they echo each other so precisely? Across civilizations that supposedly had no contact, perhaps they were all remembering the same cataclysm, an event so massive it scarred humanity's collective memory, encoded in story so it would never be forgotten. But myths carry more than just catastrophe. They often contain knowledge that seems strangely advanced for the time in which they were told. In India's ancient texts, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, there are detailed descriptions of flying machines called vimanas. These vehicles are said to move across the skies, sometimes even between worlds, with precise instructions about their shapes, propulsion, and even battles fought with them. Skeptics call them poetic metaphors, yet the level of technical detail is baffling, almost as if the writers were preserving memories of technologies they no longer fully understood. Imagine survivors of a fallen civilization describing airplanes or rockets in the only language they knew. Would it not sound mythical to future generations? Similarly, the Dogon tribe of Mali in Africa preserved myths about the star system Sirius. For centuries, they told stories that Sirius was not one star but two, with one so small and dense it was invisible to the naked eye. They said beings from that system visited them in ancient times, teaching them agriculture and knowledge of the cosmos. Astonishingly, modern astronomy confirmed in the 20th century that Sirius is indeed a binary system, with a small white dwarf companion invisible without telescopes. How did the Dogon know this? Were their myths echoes of ancient contact, or remnants of knowledge passed down from a forgotten era? Even Greek mythology, often treated as pure fantasy, contains strange fragments of knowledge. Prometheus, the Titan, is said to have stolen fire from the gods to give to humanity, a story usually taken as a metaphor for technology or enlightenment. Yet what if it is more literal? Could fire represent a form of advanced knowledge, perhaps electricity or engineering, bestowed upon humanity by beings who were remembered as gods? In Egypt, the god Thoth was said to have gifted writing and wisdom to mankind. In Mesoamerican cultures, Quetzalcoatl and Viracocha were remembered as bearded, robed figures who taught laws, mathematics, and astronomy before mysteriously departing. Across the world, myths describe divine teachers who arrive suddenly, impart knowledge, and then vanish. Are these simply archetypes? Or are they distorted memories of survivors from advanced civilizations, carrying fragments of wisdom into the darkness after catastrophe? Another powerful example is the myth of cycles, the idea that time itself moves in repeating ages, rather than in a straight line. Hindu cosmology divides time into yugas, ages of truth, decline, and destruction. The Greeks described a golden age, followed by silver, bronze, and iron ages. The Maya saw the world as passing through multiple suns, each ending in cataclysm. Even the Norse told of Ragnarok, a cyclical destruction and rebirth of the world. Modern science has only recently begun to accept that human history may be punctuated by catastrophic resets, with evidence of comet strikes, volcanic eruptions, and sudden climate shifts causing mass extinctions and collapses of civilization. Yet ancient myths had preserved this truth for thousands of years, coded into story long before geology or astronomy could confirm it. Could it be that ancient people were not naive storytellers, but custodians of knowledge they knew would be forgotten if not hidden in allegory? Astronomical knowledge is another thread running through myths. Ancient temples, pyramids, and stone circles align with solstices, equinoxes, and star systems. The myths tied to them often describe the heavens in ways that suggest precise observation. In Australia, Aboriginal myths describe the movements of stars with accuracy confirmed by modern astronomy. In the Americas, the Inca, Maya, and Aztec linked myths to Venus, the Pleiades, and solar cycles, integrating this knowledge into calendars far more advanced than they should have been capable of. Why would hunter-gatherers or early farmers need such exact celestial knowledge, unless perhaps they inherited it from a people who did? But myths are not only about knowledge of the stars or lost technologies, they also encode warnings. The myths of Atlantis, told by Plato, describe a civilization that rose to great power, grew corrupt, and was destroyed in a single day and night of fire and flood. Was this a moral allegory, or was it a memory of a real event, a warning preserved so future civilizations might avoid the same fate? Flood myths too are warnings of the fragility of human achievement, reminding us that nature or the cosmos can erase entire worlds overnight. When myths speak of gods punishing humanity with destruction, Perhaps they are not describing wrathful deities at all, but natural cataclysms, comet impacts, mega tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, interpreted through the language of survival. What makes myths so enduring is that they work on two levels. To the casual listener, they are simple tales of gods, heroes, and monsters. But to those who know how to read them, they may contain coded maps of history, astronomy, and morality. They are libraries disguised as fables, designed to carry truths across the dark ages of forgetfulness. Perhaps ancient storytellers knew that languages change, civilizations collapse, and knowledge is lost, but stories endure, and so they wrapped their wisdom in myth, ensuring that even if the details faded, the essence would survive. The more we study myths, the more they look like fractured mirrors, each reflecting a different angle of the same forgotten truth. The challenge for us is to piece those fragments together, to listen to the echoes across time, to treat myths not as fantasy but as memory, for within their strange symbols and impossible tales may lie the key to understanding who we were, what we lost, and what dangers may yet return. Myths may not just tell us about the past, they may also be warning us of the future. Throughout myths, ruins, and legends, one theme returns again and again: catastrophe. Civilizations rise, flourish, and then vanish, leaving behind only fragments for future generations to puzzle over. Modern science confirms that the Earth has endured many cataclysms, some global, some regional. Yet what if these disasters were not just natural events, but the triggers that repeatedly erased advanced cultures? The evidence suggests that humanity's past is not a smooth climb, but a series of rises and falls, interrupted by fire, water, ice, and stone from the skies. The catastrophes that reshaped the world may explain why myths of floods, firestorms, and collapsing skies are so universal. Perhaps the most famous is the Great Flood. Geological evidence points to several massive flooding events that could match the memory preserved in myth. At the end of the last ice age, around 12,000 years ago, enormous glacial lakes burst their boundaries, sending walls of water crashing across continents. The Younger Dryas period, a sudden and violent cooling that began about 12,800 years ago, coincides with evidence of comet fragments striking the Earth, igniting wildfires on a scale unimaginable, darkening the skies, and collapsing ecosystems. Could this be the event behind the near-global flood myths? Rising seas swallowed coastlines, drowning cities and settlements, while survivors carried the memory of destruction into their myths. To them, it must have seemed as though the gods themselves had turned against humanity. Volcanic eruptions have also played their part in reshaping civilizations. The eruption of Thera, modern Santorini, around 1600 BCE, devastated the Minoan civilization, perhaps inspiring the tale of Atlantis. Ash and fire darkened skies, crops failed, and entire islands were obliterated. Krakatoa in 1883 was so powerful that it altered global climate and produced sunsets recorded in paintings around the world. Imagine such an eruption in ancient times: villages swallowed, skies blackened, seas boiling, and it becomes clear why myths describe fire raining from the heavens and gods unleashing fury. For those who lived through it, these were not natural events but apocalyptic punishments, seared into memory and passed down as sacred warnings. Earthquakes, too, have toppled empires. Cities like Troy, Jericho, and even great stretches of the Mediterranean show signs of seismic destruction. Entire civilizations may have been wiped out in moments, their monuments left broken, their history silenced. To ancient survivors, such devastation must have seemed supernatural, as if the earth itself were alive and angry. Is it any wonder that myths describe gods striking the ground with thunderbolts or tearing open the earth in rage? What they witnessed was real, seismic catastrophe, and their interpretation of it became the myths we retell today. But the most terrifying catastrophes come from above. Myths across the world describe fire from the sky, stars falling, and gods hurling blazing stones at the earth. These may not have been mere imagination. Meteor impacts have repeatedly scarred the planet, triggering destruction on a global scale. The Chicxulub impact 65 million years ago famously ended the reign of the dinosaurs, but more recent strikes may have shaped human history. The Tunguska event of 1908 flattened 800 square miles of Siberian forest with the force of a nuclear bomb. Imagine such an event striking a populated region in ancient times. The fireball streaking across the sky, the explosion leveling everything in sight. Survivors would have seen it as divine wrath, a celestial punishment, and their myths would preserve it forever. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis suggests that fragments of a disintegrating comet may have struck the Earth around 12,800 years ago, igniting wildfires and plunging the world into a mini ice age. This coincides with the sudden disappearance of the Clovis culture in North America and the extinction of mammoths and other megafauna. If true, this was not just a natural disaster, but a turning point in human history, erasing cultures and forcing survivors into a dark age. The memory of fire from the sky, floods from melting glaciers, and global chaos would have burned itself into collective memory, passed down as myth long after the details were lost. Even smaller catastrophes can accumulate into civilizational collapse. Droughts lasting decades have ended empires, as in the case of the Maya, whose great cities were abandoned after centuries of brilliance. Famine, plague, and disease have swept across continents, decimating populations and reducing once great powers to scattered ruins. To those who lived through such times, the collapse of order and the disappearance of prosperity would have seemed like the end of the world. Myths of divine anger and curses may simply be human attempts to explain the chaos that followed environmental collapse. What unites all these catastrophes is their cyclical nature. They are not rare, once-in-eternity events, but recurring forces that shape history. Ice ages come and go, volcanoes erupt, earthquakes strike without warning, meteors rain down unpredictably. The Earth itself is a restless planet, and humanity has always been at its mercy. The myths preserve this truth, wrapped in story, warning future generations that greatness can vanish in a single night. The unsettling realization is that if catastrophes shaped the past, they will shape the future. We live in an age of technology, satellites and nuclear power, but our civilization is just as vulnerable. A massive solar flare could cripple electrical grids worldwide. A supervolcano like Yellowstone could erupt, blanketing skies with ash and collapsing agriculture. An asteroid strike, even a small one, could devastate cities or alter global climate. We comfort ourselves with the illusion of permanence, yet history and myth remind us that permanence is an illusion. Every golden age has ended, every empire has fallen, and catastrophe waits, patient and inevitable. Perhaps this is why myths are filled not only with stories of destruction, but with warnings disguised as allegory. The flood myths remind us of rising seas and fragile coastlines. The fire from the sky stories warn of celestial impact. The tales of wrathful gods punishing prideful empires remind us that hubris leads to downfall. For ancient storytellers, encoding these truths into myth was a survival strategy, a way to ensure that even when writing and monuments were lost, the lessons would remain. They knew that knowledge alone could not prevent catastrophe, but memory might help survivors rebuild. When we look at catastrophes through this lens, history changes. Civilization is not a march forward, but a series of rises interrupted by disaster, each leaving only fragments for the next cycle. The ruins we see today, the myths we tell, are the debris and echoes of previous ages erased by catastrophe. What we call the beginning of history may simply be the beginning after the last great reset. And if that is true, then we too live on borrowed time, standing atop a fragile system that can crumble in an instant. The myths of catastrophe endure because they are true, not just metaphorically, but physically. They are the voices of ancestors who lived through apocalypse, who saw their world swallowed by fire, water, or darkness. They are echoes across the ages, reminders that disaster is never far away, and that even the greatest civilizations are only one catastrophe away from myth. Perhaps the most haunting thought is this: when the next catastrophe comes, and it will, what will remain of us? Will our skyscrapers be ruins for future generations to puzzle over? Will our stories become myths of gods and machines? Will we too be reduced to fragments, remembered only as a golden age swallowed by the turning wheel of history? When catastrophes swept across the world, whether floods that swallowed coastlines, fire from the skies, or volcanic eruptions that darkened the heavens, most of humanity perished, but not all. Survivors always remained, scattered remnants of once great civilizations, carrying with them fragments of memory, fragments of knowledge, and fragments of identity. These survivors became the seeds of the next age, the ones who passed on what little they remembered, encoding their wisdom into myths, rituals, and symbols. Across cultures, we find stories of wise teachers, culture bringers, and mysterious strangers who appear after disaster to rebuild and guide humanity. Who were these figures, Were they literal gods, mythic archetypes, or the last keepers of knowledge from worlds already lost? In Mesoamerica, the Aztecs spoke of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god who arrived after a time of chaos to teach agriculture, astronomy, and law. The Incas had Viracocha, a bearded figure said to have walked across the Andes, raising civilizations, teaching crafts, and then disappearing across the sea. In both cases, these beings are remembered as bringers of order, wisdom, and technology, arriving when humanity was scattered and vulnerable. Were these gods in the literal sense, or were they survivors? Individuals carrying knowledge from fallen cities, remembered and mythologized by those who received their teachings. In Egypt, Thoth was said to be the god of writing, wisdom and mathematics, the one who gifted humanity the knowledge needed to govern itself and record its history. Some legends claim that before the Great Flood, Thoth preserved the knowledge of the ancients in hidden libraries, storing the secrets of geometry, astronomy, and spiritual lore so that they would survive the destruction to come. Could this be a memory of real efforts to safeguard knowledge from catastrophe? If so, where are those libraries now? The myth of the Hall of Records, said to be hidden beneath the Great Sphinx, or in other secret chambers, persists because it fits a pattern found worldwide, the belief that ancient knowledge was deliberately hidden for future generations, preserved by the keepers of wisdom. In India, figures like Manu and sages of the Vedic tradition are remembered as preservers of truth after cycles of destruction. Manu, warned of a great flood by a divine fish, saved not only himself but the knowledge needed to rebuild. The Vedas, some of the oldest religious texts known to humanity, are said to have been passed down orally through countless generations, preserving astronomical, philosophical, and spiritual knowledge in coded form. The guardians of this wisdom were not simply storytellers but custodians, keeping alive fragments of a golden age through ritual chant and myth, ensuring that even if writing and monuments were lost, the essence of knowledge survived. Even among indigenous peoples far from the centers of classical civilization, myths describe similar figures. The Hopi of North America tell of the ant people, mysterious beings who sheltered humanity underground during times of global catastrophe, feeding and protecting them until it was safe to return to the surface. The Zulu speak of gods descending from the stars to teach agriculture and metallurgy. Polynesian cultures preserve stories of navigators who carried knowledge of the stars across oceans, allowing them to sail vast distances with precision modern science is only now beginning to understand. In every case, these survivors and keepers of knowledge are remembered not as ordinary humans but as something more, elevated to divine or mythic status by those who inherited their wisdom. What makes these stories compelling is their consistency. Across continents and cultures we find the same pattern. Disaster strikes, civilizations collapse, survivors carry fragments of knowledge forward, and mysterious teachers appear to guide humanity into a new age. If these were mere allegories, why are they so consistent? Why do cultures with no contact tell the same story of survivors, of teachers, of knowledge preserved against the odds? The simplest explanation may be the most startling, because it actually happened. But if knowledge was preserved, where is it now? Some believe it lies hidden in plain sight, encoded in myths and monuments. The alignment of the pyramids to celestial bodies may be more than architecture. It may be a message, a map, or a calendar designed to survive the ages. The strange symbols of Göbekli Tepe may be more than decoration. They may be a record of astronomical cycles or cosmic events preserved by those who witnessed them. Even in the Bible, stories of the Ark of the Covenant or the tablets of Moses could be read as memories of technology or knowledge carried forward by survivors. Others suggest that secret societies have inherited fragments of this wisdom. The myths of the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, and other esoteric traditions often claim lineage from ancient keepers of knowledge, tracing their origins back to Egypt, Mesopotamia, or even Atlantis. Whether literal or symbolic, these traditions preserve the idea that hidden knowledge has always been guarded by a select few, passed down in secret while the masses lived unaware. If true, then the keepers of knowledge are not just mythic figures of the past, but real lineages that survive into the present. Science itself hints at the possibility of lost knowledge. How did ancient people, supposedly primitive, align structures to solstices and equinoxes with near-perfect accuracy? How did they carve and move stones weighing hundreds of tons? How did they encode advanced mathematical ratios into monuments like the Great Pyramid? These achievements suggest either knowledge rediscovered or knowledge preserved. Survivors of past catastrophes may not have carried machines or libraries with them, but they carried principles, astronomy, geometry, engineering that were enough to plant the seeds of future civilizations. To their descendants, they were gods. To us, they are mystery. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of these stories is what they suggest about us. If survivors and keepers of knowledge rebuilt the world after past catastrophes, then our own civilization is the product of forgotten teachers, the heirs of wisdom carried through fire and flood. We are not the first to climb toward greatness, but one more cycle in an endless pattern of rise and fall. If that is true, then what will happen when our cycle ends? Who will preserve our knowledge? Who will become the keepers for the next age? The myths remind us that survival is not only physical but intellectual. Civilizations collapse, but ideas endure if they are preserved with care. That is why myths, rituals and monuments mattered so deeply to ancient people. They were not simply expressions of culture but vaults of memory, designed to outlast catastrophe. The survivors and keepers of knowledge knew that their world would be forgotten if they did not preserve it, and so they became the custodians of memory, the architects of continuity, the bridge between worlds. In the end, the survivors are not just characters in myths, they are us. Humanity itself is the survivor, carrying memory forward through each catastrophe, forgetting much but preserving enough to rebuild. The keepers of knowledge, whether gods, sages, or secret orders, are the reason we are not starting from nothing each time. They are the threads that bind the cycles together, the proof that even when civilizations fall, humanity does not vanish. It adapts, remembers, and begins again. And perhaps the greatest mystery of all is this: how much of their knowledge still lies hidden, waiting to be found? If survivors encoded their wisdom in myths, monuments, and secret traditions, then maybe the story of the past is not finished. Maybe fragments of a forgotten age are still waiting for us to uncover, reminding us that the cycle continues, and that we too will one day rely on the memory of survivors to guide the world after the next fall. When we look closely at the stories of gods in ancient cultures, a startling question emerges: were these deities truly divine beings, or were they the remnants of flesh and blood humans, or perhaps something else entirely, who carried forward knowledge from forgotten ages? Across the world, legends describe gods who descend from the heavens, walk among mortals, teach agriculture, astronomy, writing, and architecture, and then vanish, leaving behind myths, temples, and mysteries. The consistency of these stories suggests that the gods may not have been imaginary figures at all, but teachers remembered as divine because their knowledge seemed otherworldly to those who received it. If we strip away the layers of metaphor and devotion, what remains is the possibility that our ancestors were guided, shaped, and inspired by ancient teachers, beings so advanced they were mistaken for gods. Consider the Sumerians, one of the earliest known civilizations, who credited their knowledge to the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came. According to their myths, the Anunnaki descended from the skies, established cities, and taught humanity agriculture, writing, and law. To the Sumerians, these figures were gods, yet their descriptions sound strangely physical. They ate, they drank, they fought among themselves, and they ruled as kings. Could they have been survivors from an earlier age, bearing the fragments of lost knowledge? Or, as some suggest, could they have been visitors not of this world, whose advanced presence sparked the birth of civilization? The Egyptians told similar stories of divine teachers. Osiris was remembered not merely as a god of the afterlife, but as a civilizer, a being who brought agriculture, law, and culture to the Nile Valley. Thoth, as mentioned earlier, was the god of wisdom, mathematics, and writing, who preserved knowledge through cycles of destruction. Even the builders of the pyramids credited their skills to divine guidance. The gods of Egypt were not distant, invisible deities, but walking, teaching figures who actively shaped the world. If they were symbolic, why are their roles so practical, so focused on transmitting knowledge? It suggests that the Egyptians were recording memory, not metaphor, describing ancient teachers remembered in the only language that could preserve their importance. In the Andes, Viracocha was said to have emerged after a great flood, a tall, bearded figure in white robes who taught the people agriculture, architecture, and morality. He was revered as a god, yet he walked among mortals, teaching them how to build and organize their lives. When his work was done, he departed across the sea, promising to return. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, played a nearly identical role, bringing knowledge, laws, and astronomy to the people before vanishing. Both Viracocha and Quetzalcoatl were remembered as benevolent teachers, not distant creators, and both share uncanny similarities despite arising in cultures separated by continents. Could they have been different cultural memories of the same figure, or the same type of figure, appearing in multiple places to guide humanity after catastrophe? Even in India, the gods of the Vedic tradition often acted as bringers of knowledge rather than purely supernatural beings. Figures like Manu and ancient sages were depicted not only as religious leaders, but as lawgivers and teachers who preserved wisdom from past cycles. The Vimanas described in their texts may have been remembered technologies, explained through the lens of divinity. The Mahabharata even described celestial weapons with the destructive power of modern bombs. Hardly the imagery one would expect from a culture with no knowledge of such things, unless they were remembering fragments of real encounters with technology beyond their understanding. If so, then the gods of the Vedas were not only spiritual symbols but keepers of memory, carrying knowledge forward when it should have been lost. Greek mythology also fits this pattern. Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods to give to mankind, is remembered as a titan punished for empowering humanity. Was fire a metaphor for literal fire, or was it something more: technology, science, knowledge that advanced humanity beyond survival into civilization? The Olympian gods, too, were often portrayed as walking among mortals, marrying them, teaching them, and shaping their lives direct. To later generations, their stories became allegories of morality and power. But to the earliest tellers, they may have been distorted memories of teachers so advanced they seemed divine. The Dogon tribe of Mali, as previously mentioned, tell of beings from the star Sirius who visited them and imparted knowledge of the cosmos. They described Sirius as a binary system long before modern science confirmed it. To the Dogon, these beings were sacred, but their description suggests not spirits or metaphors, but literal visitors, remembered as gods, because their knowledge was incomprehensible. This raises an unsettling question. Were some of these teachers not from Earth at all, but from beyond it? If so, the line between gods and teachers blurs even further. What unites all these traditions is the recurring theme of gods who walk among men, impart knowledge, and then depart. They do not simply create the world and remain distant. They intervene, teach, and shape civilization directly. To those living in the aftermath of catastrophe, struggling to survive, such figures would indeed seem divine. Imagine a group of survivors arriving in a village with knowledge of agriculture, architecture, or medicine. To the villagers who had never seen such things, these individuals would appear as gods. Their teachings would be revered, their presence mythologized, and over generations, their humanity would be forgotten, replaced by the aura of divinity. The gods, then, may not have been deities at all, but survivors of lost civilizations or perhaps visitors from beyond, whose memory was preserved in story. But why did they leave? Why do myths always describe the gods as departing, promising to return, but never staying? Perhaps because they could not. If they were survivors of a fallen civilization, their numbers may have been too small to rebuild fully, their knowledge too fragile to maintain. They could plant seeds, guide humanity, and then fade, their presence immortalized in myth. If they were visitors from beyond, perhaps their mission was limited: teach, guide, and then retreat, leaving humanity to grow on its own. Whatever the reason, the result is the same: gods who vanish, leaving behind knowledge but no clear proof, ensuring that future generations would always wonder. The danger lies in how their teachings were remembered. Knowledge carried orally or encoded in myth inevitably became distorted. Over time, practical wisdom transformed into divine commandments, technologies became magical powers, and teachers became gods. The memory of their humanity or their true nature was lost, replaced by worship and ritual. What began as guidance ended as religion, with fragments of truth buried beneath centuries of symbolism. And yet, enough remains that we can still glimpse the outlines of something real. A memory of beings who were not mere figments of imagination, but living presences in our distant past. This raises a final unsettling thought. If our ancestors mistook teachers for gods, how would we react today? If such figures returned, if beings arrived with knowledge far beyond our own, Would we see them as advanced humans, as extraterrestrials, or as divine messengers? Would we worship them as our ancestors did, or would we recognize them for what they are, the keepers of knowledge, the remnants of forgotten ages, the bridge between myth and history? The answer may depend not on them, but on us, on whether we are ready to see the gods of myth, not as fantasy, but as memory. When we look at the scattered ruins, the myths of gods as teachers, and the fragments of stories carried through time, one question refuses to go away. How did ancient people achieve feats that still baffle us today? The mainstream view insists they did so with simple tools, brute strength, and endless patience. Yet the evidence carved into stone, aligned with the stars, and preserved in legend, suggests otherwise. There are achievements in the ancient world that feel less like primitive improvisations and more like the remnants of technologies now lost. Technologies that hint at a forgotten age of advancement far older than we are taught. These are not mere curiosity, they are anomalies, cracks in the story of human progress, and they force us to ask whether the ancients knew something we do not. Consider the Great Pyramid of Giza, standing for over 4,500 years. It is aligned true north with a precision unmatched by any other structure of its time. Its base covers 13 acres, each side measuring over 750 feet, and the difference in length between the longest and shortest side is less than a fraction of an inch. The stones used weigh between 2 and 80 tons, some hauled from quarries hundreds of miles away. Conventional explanations speak of ramps and ropes, yet no complete theory fully accounts for the sheer logistics, let alone the astronomical alignments encoded within. The pyramid incorporates advanced mathematical constants like pi and the golden ratio, and its proportions mirror the dimensions of the Earth itself. Was this coincidence, or was it evidence that the builders had knowledge geometry, astronomy and engineering far beyond what their era should have allowed? If so, where did that knowledge come from? Then there is Pumapunku in Bolivia, a site that seems almost designed to defy explanation. Massive blocks of andesite, some weighing over 100 tons, are carved with precise right angles and interlocking grooves, as though they were molded, not chiseled. The cuts are so exact that they resemble machine work, yet no evidence of tools capable of such precision has been found. Local legends say the site was built in a single night by gods wielding power over stone. Skeptics dismiss this as myth, yet the reality is no less astonishing. Somehow, people with no wheels, no iron tools, and no written language created a site that challenges even modern technology. Was this lost knowledge, methods of working stone that we no longer understand, or was it something else entirely, a memory of tools or machines now vanished? In the jungles of Cambodia, Angkor Wat stretches across 400 acres, the largest religious monument in the world. Its temples are aligned with solstices and equinoxes, its towers map to constellations, and its bas-reliefs tell stories of cosmic cycles. How did its builders, with no modern instruments, achieve such astronomical precision? At Stonehenge in England, massive stones stand in alignment with solstices and lunar cycles, functioning as both temple and calendar. In Malta, megalithic temples older than the pyramids display similar alignments, suggesting a shared obsession with the heavens and a shared knowledge of the stars. Were these simply ceremonial sites, or were they observatories, designed by people who understood the cosmos in ways we struggle to imagine? And what of Baalbek in Lebanon, where the ruins of a Roman temple rest on a foundation of megaliths so massive that they defy logic? The trilithon stones, each weighing around 800 tons, were cut and transported with a precision modern cranes would struggle to match. How were they moved, and why use stones of such enormous size when smaller ones would have sufficed? Some suggest these were remnants of an earlier civilization, with the Romans simply building atop what they found. If true, then the technology to move such stones was not Roman at all, but belonged to a forgotten age. Even the sea hides mysteries of lost technologies. Off the coast of Greece, the Antikythera mechanism was discovered in a shipwreck over a century ago. At first it was dismissed as debris, but closer study revealed it to be a complex gear-driven machine, an ancient computer capable of predicting eclipses and tracking planetary movements. Dated to over 2,000 years ago, it should not exist. Its complexity rivals that of clocks invented more than a millennium later. Where did the knowledge to build it come from? Was it a rediscovery of older principles preserved by the keepers of knowledge, or was it a fragment of a more advanced age lost again when the ship sank? The deeper we look, the more impossible achievements we find. The Nazca lines in Peru stretch across the desert for miles, forming geometric shapes and figures of animals that can only be appreciated from the sky. To this day, their purpose remains unclear. Were they ceremonial, astronomical, or messages to beings above? The Olmecs of Mesoamerica carved colossal stone heads weighing up to 40 tons, transported from quarries miles away, their faces detailed with helmets and features that resemble people far beyond their region. The precision of these works suggests not just artistry but engineering capability on a scale difficult to reconcile with their supposed level of development. Even myths describe technologies we dismiss as fantasy, but which may conceal kernels of truth. In the Vedic texts of India, Vimanas are described as flying chariots powered by unknown means, capable of traveling across the skies and even into the heavens. Weapons of terrifying power are also mentioned, some resembling descriptions of modern explosives. In Greece, the tale of Daedalus speaks of wings crafted to defy gravity. In the Bible, the Ark of the Covenant is depicted as both a sacred object and a dangerous one, capable of emitting deadly energy. Were these purely symbolic stories, or were they memories of technologies that no longer exist remembered imperfectly through myth? One possibility is that these achievements represent rediscoveries of natural principles we have forgotten. Ancient people may have understood resonance, magnetism, or sound in ways we no longer do. Legends of levitation, stones moved with chance, and temples built with sound may not be fantasy, but distorted memories of real techniques. If true, then ancient technologies were not about machines as we think of them, but about mastery of natural forces at a level we cannot replicate. Another possibility is even more unsettling, that these achievements were not the work of our known ancestors at all, but of civilizations erased entirely from memory, their technologies vanishing with them. Survivors may have carried fragments forward, enough to build monuments and encode alignments, but not enough to preserve the full system. What we see today may be the ruins not only of stone, but of knowledge, echoes of technologies that once existed but were obliterated in catastrophe. And then there is the possibility that cannot be ignored, that some of these achievements were not human in origin. If beings visited from beyond, as myths and traditions suggest, their knowledge would have seemed divine, their tools miraculous. The monuments we puzzle over today may not have been built by primitive hands alone, but with the guidance or intervention of teachers mistaken for gods. If so, then the lost technologies are not only a matter of forgotten human knowledge, but evidence of contact with something greater. What is clear is that the ancient world was not simple. Its achievements defy easy explanation. Its monuments whisper of forgotten sciences, and its myths preserve stories of tools and powers we cannot replicate. Whether rediscoveries of natural principles, remnants of forgotten civilizations, or gifts from beyond, these lost technologies and impossible achievements challenge our understanding of history. They remind us that progress is not a straight line, that knowledge can be gained and lost, and that what seems impossible today may have been possible long ago. And perhaps that is the true warning of these mysteries, that what is lost can be lost again. Our skyscrapers, machines, and satellites feel invincible, yet they too are fragile. If catastrophe struck tomorrow, how much of our knowledge would survive? How many of our technologies would be remembered as myths, our cities as ruins, our achievements as impossibilities? In that sense, we are not so different from the ancients. We live atop a fragile world convinced of permanence, unaware that we may one day be the next lost civilization, remembered only through fragments, our technologies mistaken for magic, our achievements dismissed as impossible. When we examine the ancient world, the most intriguing details are often hidden not in ruins or monuments, but in the texts that civilizations left behind. These writings, etched into clay tablets, carved into stone, or preserved in sacred scrolls, do not merely recount myths or religious beliefs. Many of them carry warnings, cryptic messages passed across time, urging future generations to pay attention to patterns, cycles, and dangers that repeat. These texts are often dismissed as superstition, yet when read closely they reveal a chilling consistency. Humanity has been warned again and again about catastrophes, corruption, and collapse, but we rarely listen until it is too late. Take the Sumerian texts, among the oldest written records in history. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of their most enduring stories, is not just about the adventures of a king, but tells of a great flood sent by the gods, wiping out nearly all life, with only Utnapishtim surviving to carry forward wisdom. This is more than a myth. It is a clear warning about cycles of destruction and the fragility of human civilization. The gods in the story punish arrogance and excess, but the subtext is that nature itself can unleash destruction at any time. The flood is not only divine retribution, but also a reminder that civilizations can be wiped away by forces beyond their control. The message encoded here is simple. Do not assume permanence, because disaster always waits at the edges of time. In Hindu scriptures, particularly in the Mahabharata, there are passages describing weapons of unimaginable power. One weapon is said to unleash a column of energy brighter than 1,000 suns, scorching everything in its path and contaminating the land for generations. To modern readers, this description eerily resembles the effects of nuclear weapons. Whether it was metaphor, memory of a past technology, or prophetic vision, the implication is clear. Human ambition unchecked leads to destruction. The Mahabharata does not merely glorify heroes and gods, it embeds a warning about the dangers of power misused, echoing through time to reach us in an era where such weapons exist again. The Bible, too, is filled with warnings hidden within its verses. In Genesis, the story of Babel recounts humanity's attempt to build a tower to the heavens, only for their unity to be shattered and their languages confused. The moral is often framed as divine punishment for pride, but another layer of meaning emerges when we see it as a warning against overreaching without wisdom. Technology, ambition, and unchecked unity can lead humanity to challenge natural limits, but collapse follows when hubris blinds us. Prophetic books like Isaiah and Revelation also speak of cycles of corruption and collapse, where cities fall, empires crumble, and even the stars seem to fight against mankind. These are not random prophecies, they are reminders that the higher humanity climbs without balance, the harder it will fall. In the traditions of the Maya, the Popol Vuh records multiple creations of humanity, each ending in destruction. The first humans, made of mud, dissolved. The second, carved from wood, was swept away in a flood. Only when humans were formed from corn did life endure. But the cycles of suns, the ages of the world, still end in fire, flood, or darkness. For the Maya, time was not linear but cyclical, and destruction was inevitable. Their warnings were embedded in their calendars, showing not just agricultural cycles, but cosmic ones, suggesting that humanity should always prepare for endings as much as beginnings. Even the ancient Greeks filled their stories with warnings. The myth of Icarus, who flew too close to the sun with wings of wax, is not only a tale of personal pride, but a metaphor for civilizations that overreach. The myth of Atlantis, preserved by Plato, speaks of a powerful and advanced civilization destroyed by its arrogance, swallowed by the sea. Was Atlantis a parable invented to teach humility, or was it the memory of a real lost civilization? Either way, the warning remains. No matter how advanced or mighty a culture becomes, it can still collapse in a single catastrophic moment if it forgets its balance with nature and morality. What unites these texts across cultures is not their specifics, but their underlying messages. They all insist that cycles of rise and fall are inevitable, that arrogance leads to collapse, and that humanity is never immune to forces beyond its control. They remind us of floods, fires, wars, and celestial events, hinting that the universe itself participates in these cycles. The ancients were not merely chroniclers of their own struggles, they were prophets, encoding their understanding of history into stories that could outlast stone. Another striking feature of these texts is the way they hide advanced knowledge within symbolic language. The Book of Enoch, for example, speaks of fallen angels who descended to Earth, teaching humanity metallurgy, cosmetics, astronomy, and even forbidden arts. Stripped of religious interpretation, this sounds like a memory of sudden knowledge arriving from beyond. Yet the warning is clear. Forbidden knowledge carries consequences. The angels are punished, humanity suffers, and the earth itself cries out from corruption. The hidden message is that not all knowledge leads to wisdom, and that what seems like a gift may instead be a curse. The Egyptians encoded warnings not just in texts, but in rituals and architecture. The Book of the Dead describes the weighing of the heart, a metaphor for judgment not just in the afterlife, but in life itself, where corruption and imbalance lead to destruction. In the Temple of Luxor, Astronomical alignments serve as reminders of cosmic cycles, as if the very stones whispered to future generations, "Remember the stars, for they foretell endings as much as beginnings." These were not superstitions, but systems of memory, designed to keep warnings alive through symbolism. Even indigenous traditions preserve warnings in oral stories. The Hopi of North America tell of previous worlds destroyed by fire and flood, with humanity surviving by retreating underground or being guided by spiritual beings. They speak of the present world as the fourth or fifth iteration, destined to end if humanity fails to live in harmony. These stories, carried without writing, show remarkable consistency with myths across the globe. When different cultures, separated by oceans, all insist that destruction comes in cycles, we must ask, are these warnings coincidence, or do they reflect real memories of catastrophes humanity has endured? Modern readers often dismiss these warnings because they come wrapped in myth, metaphor, or religious language. But perhaps that is the point. Knowledge hidden in story is more likely to survive across millennia than knowledge preserved in fragile machines or books. If a civilization wished to warn its descendants across tens of thousands of years, would it not embed its message in myth, knowing that stories are harder to erase? Perhaps what we call myth is not primitive imagination, but the most advanced survival strategy of all, a way to carry knowledge beyond collapse. And so we find ourselves reading these texts, not just as stories of the past, but as mirrors for the present. The warnings about arrogance, imbalance, forbidden knowledge, and cycles of destruction all feel eerily relevant today. We have built towers higher than Babel, weapons more destructive than those in the Mahabharata, and technologies whose consequences we barely understand. The ancients warned us of exactly this, of civilizations rising so high that they could only collapse under their own weight. Whether they spoke from memory, prophecy, or wisdom, their messages remained. The hidden warnings in ancient texts are not relics of superstition. They are survival guides, encoded by cultures that knew destruction firsthand. They tell us that floods will come, that fire will return, and that imbalance always leads to ruin. They tell us to be humble, to respect nature, and to remember that history is not a straight line, but a circle. The question is not whether the warnings are real. They have already proven true time and again. The question is whether we will finally listen before we too become the next myth, the next lost civilization, remembered only through fragments and whispers in the texts of tomorrow. From the moment humans first gazed at the night sky, they sensed that the heavens were not just a canvas of beauty, but a book of warnings. The stars, planets, and comets above were more than distant lights. They were signals, reminders that what happens in the cosmos can shape the fate of life below. Ancient cultures across the world believed that the movements of the heavens foretold disaster, rebirth, and the rise and fall of civilizations. While modern science often dismisses this as superstition, there is growing evidence that the ancients were not entirely wrong. Celestial events, asteroid impacts, solar flares, cometary showers have shaped Earth's history, triggering extinctions and upheavals, and perhaps encoded in myth and ritual are records of those cosmic catastrophes that humanity has endured and forgotten. Take the story of the Phaethon in Greek mythology. It tells of a reckless youth who drove the chariot of the sun across the sky, losing control and nearly setting the earth on fire, until Zeus struck him down with a thunderbolt. On the surface, it is a parable about pride, but hidden within may lie memory of a celestial disaster. Perhaps a comet or asteroid that blazed across the heavens, setting forests aflame and scorching the earth. The ancients may not have understood orbital mechanics, but they preserved the story of fire from the sky in myth. Similar themes appear worldwide. In Native American traditions, fiery serpents streak through the sky, devastating the land, while in Hindu texts, celestial weapons fall from the heavens with destructive power. These stories hint that the ancients witnessed real events, encoded as myth to ensure they would not be forgotten. Modern science now confirms that Earth has been struck repeatedly by catastrophic impacts. The Chicxulub asteroid, which ended the age of the dinosaurs, is only the most famous example. Geological records reveal other events. The Younger Dryas period, around 12,800 years ago, saw sudden cooling and mass extinctions, possibly triggered by fragments of a disintegrating comet. Curiously, this date aligns with myths of a great flood and the destruction of earlier civilizations. Could it be that humanity's stories of global cataclysm, Noah's flood, Atlantis swallowed by the sea, the end of the fourth sun in Mesoamerican lore, are not mere imagination but cultural memories of real cosmic events? If so, then the ancients were not simply stargazers, they were witnesses trying to warn us. Ancient monuments reinforce this idea. Many megalithic sites around the world are aligned not just with solstices and equinoxes, but with specific constellations and celestial events. At Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, carvings appear to depict constellations, with one pillar showing a vulture and scorpion, possibly representing Sagittarius and Scorpius. Researchers suggest these carvings may encode memories of a comet impact around the Younger Dryas period. The Great Pyramid of Giza is aligned with Orion's belt, linking it to stories of rebirth and the afterlife, while Angkor Wat in Cambodia mirrors the constellation Draco. Why would ancient builders take such pains to align their monuments with the stars? Perhaps because they believed or knew that cosmic cycles dictated earthly catastrophes, and aligning their structures was a way of preserving that knowledge. Comets, in particular, fascinated and terrified ancient people. Unlike steady stars, comets appeared suddenly, blazing across the sky with fiery tails, often coinciding with upheaval on Earth. The Chinese meticulously recorded comets for centuries, associating them with famine, war, and the fall of dynasties. The Romans saw them as omens of death, with Julius Caesar's assassination followed by a brilliant comet in the sky, later called Caesar's Comet. Were these merely coincidences? Or did comets really coincide with disruptive events on Earth? Modern research shows that comets and their debris can indeed cause atmospheric changes, fires, and even impact. What the ancients saw as divine omens may have been real warnings, cosmic messengers bringing chaos. Solar activity was another celestial force the ancients seemed to understand. Many cultures worshipped the sun, not just as a giver of life, but as a potential destroyer. Myths of solar gods punishing humanity, burning lands, or hiding their light reflect an awareness of the sun's dual role. Today, we know that solar flares and coronal mass ejections can disrupt satellites, power grids, and communications, yet the ancients encoded these fears in myth. The Egyptian sun god Ra punished humanity with fiery destruction. In Incan belief, the sun god Inti could scorch the earth in anger. In the Bible, the sun is prophesied to darken or scorch the land in the end times. Could these be distorted memories of extreme solar events witnessed in antiquity, when the sun unleashed storms that scorched fields or dimmed skies? Eclipses, too, were seen as cosmic warnings. Across cultures, they were feared as harbingers of disaster, battles between gods, or signs of world-changing events. In Babylon, eclipses were meticulously recorded and interpreted as omens for kings and empires. In China, myths describe dragons swallowing the sun or moon during eclipses, requiring rituals to ward off disaster. What we now understand as predictable celestial alignments were for the ancients terrifying reminders that the heavens could suddenly change, disrupting the rhythm of life. Though we no longer fear eclipses, the ancients may have been right to sense them as symbolic of larger cycles of change and endings. The Maya stand out for their obsession with cosmic cycles. Their calendar was not just a tool for agriculture, but a map of ages, predicting not just seasons but world ages and their inevitable ends. The long count calendar marks cycles of creation and destruction, with the infamous 2012 date misunderstood by modern culture as the end of the world. In reality, the Maya saw it as the end of one great cycle and the beginning of another. They believed time was woven into the cosmos itself, and that celestial alignments brought about endings as naturally as beginnings. Their warnings were not about a single apocalypse, but about cycles repeating, reminding us that catastrophe is not an exception but a rule. Astrology, too, may have begun not as superstition, but as an attempt to understand these cosmic patterns. The ancients tracked the movements of planets and stars with astonishing precision, not to predict personal fortunes, but to understand how celestial events influenced civilizations. The rise and fall of empires were linked to conjunctions of planets, eclipses, or comets. While modern astrology is dismissed as pseudoscience, its origins may lie in a genuine attempt to decode the relationship between the heavens and earthly events. The warnings were written in the stars, and the ancients were trying to read them. So what do these celestial warnings mean for us today? Modern science confirms that Earth is still vulnerable to cosmic threats. Near-Earth asteroids pass close to our planet every year, sometimes only discovered days before their approach. The sun continues to emit solar storms, and we remain unprepared for a massive coronal event. that could cripple global infrastructure. Comet debris still rains upon Earth, and some scientists believe periodic comet showers may coincide with mass extinctions. What the ancients encoded in myth and stone, we now confirm with telescopes and satellites. Catastrophe is not a distant possibility, but an inevitable part of our planet's story. The real question is whether we are listening. The ancients preserved their warnings in myths, rituals, alignments, and texts, because they understood that knowledge fades, but stories endure. They tried to tell us that fire from the sky, floods from the heavens, and cycles of destruction would come again. They were not speaking in riddles to frighten children. They were sending messages across time. And now, with the tools of modern science, we can finally decode those messages and see them for what they are: survival instructions from civilizations that endured catastrophe before us. Perhaps the most haunting thought is this: if the stars carry the patterns of catastrophe, then we already know the ending of our story. The heavens have written it down. The question is not whether disaster will come, it always does, but whether we will be prepared when it does. And in that sense, the ancients' warnings are more urgent now than ever, for we are a civilization that gazes at the stars with telescopes yet ignores the wisdom encoded by those who came before. The stars are speaking, just as they always have. The only question is whether we will finally listen. As we reach the end of this journey, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. The story of humanity is far older, stranger, and more fragile than we are taught. Across myths, ruins, and texts scattered across continents, a single theme emerges. Civilizations rise, they flourish, and they fall, often leaving behind only fragments for the next to rediscover. The ancients tried to warn us through stories of floods, fires, and cosmic upheavals. They built monuments aligned with the stars, encoded knowledge in symbols, and passed down memories through oral traditions. These were not idle tales or random coincidences. They were survival guides, echoes from a cycle we are still a part of. We often imagine ourselves as the pinnacle of human progress, the first to unlock the mysteries of technology, space, and power. Yet when we look at the precision of ancient monuments, the uncanny warnings in sacred texts, and the global consistency of myths, we are forced to ask, are we truly the first, or merely the latest? If entire civilizations once walked this earth with knowledge we cannot yet explain, then we are inheritors of a story that began long before our recorded history. That story is not linear but cyclical, reminding us that what is built can always be unbuilt, and what is gained can always be lost. The ancients spoke of arrogance, of humanity reaching too high without wisdom, and of disasters that reset the world. Today, their warnings feel more relevant than ever. We stand on the edge of unprecedented technological power, capable of creating, but also capable of destroying ourselves in ways even more catastrophic than a flood or fire. We tamper with forces we do not fully understand: nuclear energy, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, just as the ancients warned against forbidden knowledge. Their myths, once dismissed as superstition, now read like cautionary tales written for us, not for them. And yet, these stories are not only about destruction, they are also about survival. Each cycle, no matter how devastating, carries forward fragments of knowledge, memory, and hope. Survivors emerge, stories endure, and humanity begins again. If there is a message hidden across time, it is not only that catastrophe is inevitable, but that renewal is possible. We are here because others lived through their endings and found a way to preserve what mattered most. Not machines or cities, but memory encoded in myth and stone. The conclusion, then, is not that we should despair at the inevitability of collapse. It is that we must learn from the past, respect the cycles, and prepare for the future. The ancients left us warnings because they wanted us to see the patterns, to avoid the mistakes, and to carry forward the wisdom they fought to preserve. If we ignore them, we risk becoming just another lost civilization, reduced to ruins and myths for future generations to ponder. But if we listen, if we take their warnings seriously, then perhaps we can break the cycle, or at least soften its blows. As we look to the stars, as we push the boundaries of our knowledge, we must remember that we are not invincible. The Earth has a long memory, and the cosmos has rules far beyond our control. The ancients knew this, and they tried to tell us. Their voices echo across time, whispering through myths, carved into monuments, and hidden in texts. They speak not of fantasy, but of truth. The only question left is whether we, in our age of arrogance and achievement, are ready to listen, or whether we will choose to ignore their warnings, repeating the cycle once more until we too become a forgotten chapter in the endless story of rise and fall.